All right. Hey there, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. Appreciate you getting logged in on time. Question today. So, Sunday was Veterans Day. So, do you have any family members who have served in the military? I, for example, have a grandfather who was in the Army, and then a great grandfather who served as a pilot during World War II. Oh, and awesome, Andy. Mom's dad. Stepdad's dad was in the military for 20 years. Jason's dad and two grandfathers did. Great uncle was in World War II. Oh, wow, and was held captive in Japan. Keegan's great grandpa served in World War II. Lot of grandpas I see. Cadences as well. Awesome. Sam's got a cousin that served. Noah's dad in the Army, uncle in the Marines. And hey there, Eli, good morning. Gotcha, Andy. Awesome. Obviously, want to thank all of our veterans for their military service, um, helping to keep the country safe. Adam's got an uncle in the Air Force. Eli's uncle served in the Navy. Awesome. Good deal. Um, go ahead and go to the vocab slide here so you can jot the vocabulary down. And then I know it may seem like a while's off, but it's going to be here faster than you know it. We are starting to approach the end of the semester. December 19th is the last day for students. So for most of you, hey, Booker, all done with the bone. All done. For most of you, um, grades looking great. Keep doing what you're doing. Be a good end to the semester. There are a couple of you that need to start thinking about what we need to change in the next couple of weeks in order to make sure you get a passing grade in government, because government is a graduation requirement. If you don't pass government this semester, that means you got to take it again next semester, or it potentially delays graduation plans, which I don't want that to be the case for anyone. I'd rather you just pass the class this semester, and then that's one more thing checked off the list for you. So obviously, if you need help with anything, let me know. More than happy to, we can schedule time to kind of go over your grade and all of that and talk through things. More than happy to do that. Just let me know. But today, we're going to dig into social policy, which I hope will be interesting to many of you, because this is really kind of where we're looking at, well, what are the different things government does for people, or to help American people out. So we'll kind of look at a couple of different examples. We'll talk about the New Deal, Social Security, and the Great Society in the later half of class. But give me one moment here to send out the email to those who are running late, and then we'll get going. All right. So, social policy is basically any policy that the government carries out that has to do with the welfare or the well-being of the people. Uh, so can you think of any potential examples of things government does or government's involved in that tries to improve the well-being of people, or tries to kind of improve the quality of their life in some way or another? or anything where government provides some support or assistance. Yeah, definitely. So any sort of welfare program, like any sort of government program where it provides some sort of economic assistance to people who are struggling, um, would fit under that. Definitely, Jorgen. Things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. If you don't know what those things are, don't worry. We're gonna talk about them in this class today. Um, and those would all be examples of programs that kind of help specific groups of struggling Americans. Um, is there anything government creates or government provides or makes available to everyone that you can think of? I'll give you a hint. There's at least one example that you all take advantage of. Excellent, Jorgen. That'd be a good one too. Different public places like libraries, um, a a community location where anyone can come and learn. Check out books. Good, Keegan. Yeah. Um, if government is coming in and building public transportation systems to kind of improve the well-being of people, providing people with a method of transportation that they otherwise wouldn't individually get to have access to, absolutely. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of different areas that fit with public policy. Um, we can generally kind of characterize them in a couple of different areas. One, anything that is government trying to help or improve the physical and mental health of people. So Medicare and Medicaid would fit in that because those are government programs that provide health insurance to groups of Americans that otherwise might have trouble with that. The Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare as it's also known, would be another example of this. Um, Anything that tries to improve the living conditions of people. Um, CHIP or food stamps would be an example of this. In some communities, there might be what's known as government housing, which is essentially housing that's built and maintained by the government and usually is priced at a lower amount than other housing would be, because that's an attempt by the government to help try to provide housing for people who otherwise would have trouble paying for it. And then a big one, education. Public schooling would, of course, be an example of that. Any effort to try to make it easier, provide people assistance paying for education, like grants and loans for colleges, that would fit under social policy as well. So we could look at a wide variety of different social programs that government provides. But as an example, I want us to kind of spend a little bit of time working through public schooling, just because that's the one program we're all going to be familiar with. Because we're all familiar with going to school, obviously, as we're all you're all doing it right now. So here in the United States, um, government provides access to public schooling for students kindergarten through 12th grade. You don't have to worry about paying tuition. That is a government provided service. And even if you're like our school's a charter school, so it's not officially like a government run public school, but ultimately your tuition is still, paid by the government. Your families don't individually have to figure out how to pay to go to the school. It's covered through the government. And so what I want to begin with is for us to kind of just take a couple of minutes to think and write some of your thoughts through the questions and answers chat of why might the government provide and enforce the right for every child in America to receive a K through 12 education? Um, and note that's not just if you're a U.S. citizen. Um, that applies to every child in America, kind of regardless of what their situation may be. So take 5 minutes to think about that. Try to come up with possibly as many reasons as you can think of why government might provide education as a public service, and then we'll kind of come back as a group and share our thoughts. So we'll come back here at 9:31. All right, finish typing up your response if you haven't sent it to me already. Let me grab some of the responses I've gotten so far and share them up here on the whiteboard. All right. A lot of really great thoughts here and observations on why government might have decided to start providing education as a public service, because that's not something government has always done. If we went back to the early days of the United States, public education was not something you found across the United States. But as a country over time, we came to the conclusion of like, no, this is something we really want government to step up and make sure is available to everyone. And so a lot of good thoughts on why that might be, because I mean, ultimately, that's very expensive for government to do. To essentially pay the tuition for every student or every child to get 13 years of schooling. That's a lot of money for government to spend. So why does it do it? Why is that something that we as a country feel like is a worthwhile social policy? Um, a lot of you kind of hit upon this idea of to make sure that every child kind of gets at least a certain level of education. Many of you talked about how that helps make people ready for the workforce, opens up more job opportunities. Yeah, I mean, you think about a person who never went to school ever, ultimately never learned how to read or write or to do even basic mathematics. That would probably severely limit what jobs they could get hired for as an adult. Definitely would kind of limit opportunities at that point. Um, I like this thought also of hoping that education helps people to grow up to be responsible members of society. Um, Again, if you imagine just a child being left home alone for 18 years of their life, um, maybe they'd learn responsibility on their own. Maybe they wouldn't. I also love this thought of helps ensure that it doesn't matter what your background is. Everyone's going to get that access to an education. Um, including if you happen to come from a family who may be of lower income, that's one thing that that family doesn't have to worry so much about paying for. It's going to be provided as a public service. Future jobs and positions, providing all children with an opportunity, hopefully contributing to society in a positive way. Absolutely, I love it. Potentially allows them to have the interest in going to college or pursuing other um, educational career paths. Yeah, absolutely. It's not hard to imagine that there are young people who, if they never got that K through 12 education, probably wouldn't have even considered going to college. But by having access to that K through 12 education and kind of discovering what their interests are, what skills they want to develop, then that kind of setting them up to go to college. Also, a good thought here. If we didn't have public schooling, that could potentially lead to an increase in homelessness and jobless numbers, because you likely would just have a lot more people in the country that didn't have the skills um, to do a lot of the jobs that exist in this country today. Um, especially as America has developed and we've seen more and more farming jobs and factory jobs be replaced by machines. That increasingly means that the jobs that are available in the United States are jobs that require a certain level of education and skills. They tend to not be jobs that you can just show up and they'll teach you how to do the entire job on day one. There's kind of an expectation that you kind of have some knowledge going into the job. Also, this is good thought of, looking at how the United States compares to other countries. Um, Absolutely. If American children did not receive an education, we would likely fall behind other countries in the world. We would have less doctors and engineers and scientists, that over time would kind of put our country at a disadvantage to the countries that are spending the money educating their next generation to kind of be that next generation of leaders. Um, Excellent. A lot of good thoughts here. So these a lot of the things you came up with are major reasons why the government provides public education as a social service. Um, Coming to the conclusion that it's a worthwhile investment in the country. Yes, it costs a lot of money. Um, it requires government to collect a lot of tax dollars to pay for public education. Um, but ultimately, as a society, we've decided there are some clear benefits in doing that. Um, Now, here's your opportunity. If you got questions or complaints about how schooling works in the United States, I can't claim to be an expert and answer everything, but I'll do the best I can. But for example, one student at the start of the semester asked, why are schools so bad and not safe? And that's probably a question where, to fully answer it, I'd probably need more details of, well, what do you view as being bad, or what do you view as being not safe? A lot of it comes down to the community that schools are located in. If a school is located in a community that is going through different challenges, like if it's a community with high unemployment or a high poverty level, um, that generally speaking does tend to put more challenges on a school. Because, for example, imagine you were running a school where a lot of your students are coming from very low income homes to the point that maybe they're not getting fed every day. Um, how might that make the job of a school more difficult if a lot of the students are coming to school every day not getting fed? Especially if you think about like an elementary school. Yeah, Jorgen.
Hunger can lead to loss of focus and can lead to a lot of different things. I know if I get hungry, I lose my focus, and I lose my train of thought sometimes. But I know that uh, there's kids who are, if they're starving, they won't be able to pay attention in class. They won't be able to do anything. All they will think about is just the next time I'm going to eat. So that's why I think schools provide meals, at least breakfast and lunch, to the school that you will get. But I remember when I was in public school, sometimes I didn't have enough money on my card to get something, and then I had to put it back. So I was like not able to eat that day, but they always offer a free reduced breakfast and lunch, which is also
Mhm.
helpful to kids in need.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good observations there. Because yeah, you're right that if you have a school through full of children who aren't having basic needs met, like they're coming to school hungry, or especially as we're getting into colder weather, maybe they don't have the proper clothing for winter. It's really hard for a student to focus on learning if they're showing up to school hungry every day. So as a school, then that's something now you got to try to focus on, is like, okay, we got to try to feed all these kids, because if they're not fed, they're going to be too hungry to learn. Um, so oftentimes things like that can be a challenge for schools, especially in communities that might have more difficulties. Is that kind of puts more pressure on the school to try to take care of all these different things, because if a person's basic needs aren't met, they're probably not going to be learning a whole lot. As far as safety goes, yeah, unfortunately, we've seen a rise of school shootings across the United States. That's obviously concerning for a lot of people. I think the big challenge there, I can't claim to be an expert on it, but I think the big challenge is that that's frankly not something schools really had to worry about in the past. And so that's something where schools are still trying to figure out, well, what is the best way to keep students safe? Because oftentimes, different kinds of security systems cost a lot of money. Or they can be designed in ways that may be counterproductive within a school. So I think that's something where schools, nationwide, are still trying to figure out what's the best way of responding to that. And then definitely Eric, hygiene can be another one. Again, if you have a lot of students, coming from potentially, lower income backgrounds, family may not have the money to afford, proper hygiene, buying things like shampoo, deodorant, toothpaste, things like that. But again, that can kind of be a barrier to learning if students are coming to school without proper hygiene. So then that's another thing where a school may decide, like, okay, we got to figure out these basic things for kids before we can even really try to tackle education. Part of the reality is also that schools may have access to different amounts of funding. As far as Indiana goes, sorry, here, I'm probably about to sneeze. All right. Every student in Indiana gets a certain amount of money from the state, and thank you, Andy, to fund their education. But if there are then other factors that might indicate that student might need additional support, for example, a low income family, or a student in special education programs, the state might provide additional money for that, under the argument of, like, okay, that student's probably going to need additional support to be successful. They need additional money. So different schools get different amount of money per student when you kind of average out the math. So that can have a factor on things. In addition to that, some communities may decide to increase their property taxes to bring in more money for their schools. I live in Fishers, Indiana, which is an upper income suburban community north of Indianapolis. And so just in our last election, as a community, people voted to say, yes, we want to keep our property taxes a little bit higher so that our schools can get more money. That ultimately provides our schools with an additional benefit or an advantage, because we're kind of a wealthier community overall. The community can afford to put more money into the schools to maintain a higher quality of schools overall. That's not something every community can afford to do. Again, if you're talking about a lower income or an economically struggling community, maybe a community where businesses have closed down, people are losing their jobs, well, you can't really afford to raise property taxes in that kind of situation. So that can create differences. Any other questions or things you've maybe just kind of always wondered about kind of how public schooling operates in the United States? I definitely have a couple of questions we can kind of look at here and discuss if needed, but wanted to provide you all with the opportunity if you had questions.
Oh, this is one that I have.
Sure.
Why do schools always need to limit the amount of books that are in their, or like book bannings that are in their school libraries? I don't understand why people need to book ban. It's just weird. Because I know, like, my favorite books, like Harry Potter, that's banned in some libraries in schools.
Yeah. So it's a topic that kind of comes and goes at various points throughout U.S. history, and usually we see the topic of censoring or removing certain books from school libraries um, when there kind of ends up being some sort of social panic or social concern. Um, for example, back in the 1950s, when America was in the Cold War and worried about communism, there was kind of an effort to censor any media that was viewed as being communist leaning. So just what we've been seeing in recent years is a growing pushback against LGBTQ material in schools, kind of specifically in regards to trans people. And so that's kind of where that's then filtering down is you're seeing in some communities across America, organizations or parents saying material that touches upon that should be reserved for an older age. And so you're seeing some material being pulled out of school libraries under this argument that that material is too mature for younger children. So that's kind of why we've seen that in recent years, as there's kind of been a growing social movement there in that direction.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Also, as a gay person myself, it's kind of hard to explain to people, or like hard to express myself. But it's also like, I don't see the problem with having LGBTQ things in the libraries in schools. I feel like it probably should, because once you're probably like 7 or like probably around 10 is when you probably start feel like you're trying to realize yourself more, and then it's like, how do we protect yourself if we are already feeling the emotions, or the hormones going through the, like, the same sex things, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
God, it's like I wasn't feeling those emotions and probably until I was like 11 towards another person, and I was like, oh my God, he's so cute, but no.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then so for those who would be kind of on the opposite side of the issue, they would kind of have that argument of like, well, young people are going to be going through these things whether the materials in the library or not, but perhaps by having those materials in the library, that helps provide resources for young people to navigate through those challenges, transitioning into adulthood. So it's very much an ongoing conversation in the United States, and different communities are kind of pulling one way or another. It's another really good example of why it's important to be involved in our democracy, not just focusing on like the big election of who's going to be the next president, but your local elections, because it's, for example, voting for the members of your local school board that oftentimes get to make those kind of decisions of like, what material are we going to allow in school libraries? So absolutely, if that's if that's an issue that is important to you, or you feel like, you want to be involved in, that includes, participating in your local elections. Because again, oftentimes it's your local elections that have the biggest impact on your community and what's going on in your community.
How often do local elections even occur?
It's going to vary from community to community, because every community kind of gets to set its own schedule of when different positions get elected on. At least where I live, usually there's at least some local government positions that are voted on every November. So, for example, just earlier in November here, we voted on our mayor and our city council members. But I believe next November is then like when we have our county positions, like the county clerk and the coroner and things like that. So I would say a lot of places you probably do have local elections every November.
Oh, okay, thank you. Because I
Yep.
live in Benton County, and it's like I want to be able to know when I'd be able to vote next because I turned 18 in January 1st, and I will be able. I know I'll be able to vote in I think in the next 2024 election.
Yep.
That is, but it might be the presidential election or the primary election. I'm not entirely sure, but I'll be vote.
So yeah, you'll be able to do both, because as long as a person will be 18 by the next general election in November, you can also vote in the primary elections in preparation for that general election. So like, even if a person's not going to turn 18 until like October of next year, they can still vote in the primary election, which I believe happens in May for Indiana, because they will be 18 by the time of the general election in early November. And again, kind of the best place to go for all the information on elections in Indiana is that website there in the chat, indianavoters.in.gov. That's where you can go to register to vote if you haven't already registered to vote. And then you can also, it'll pull up, you'll be able to find the information of, when is the primary election? When is the general election? As we get closer to those elections, it'll also have the information of who are going to be the names on the ballot, who are going to be the different people that you can vote for. So, we've been specifically talking about schooling here, because again, that's the one we're all familiar with. But a lot of these same issues and questions emerge for any sort of social policy. Again, as we've talked about, government, provides a lot of different things. Government kind of has to think about these things, even when it comes down to like building roads. What's going to be fair in building roads? Where are roads most needed? Is there a way of, building roads that avoids negatively impacting communities? For example, when the interstate system was built in, the 1950s, 1960s, a lot of times the interstates would have been built through lower income communities, because that was seen as being the path of least resistance in a lot of cities across America. So that ended up having a bigger negative impact on lower income communities across the United States. So looking then at a couple of specific historical examples of social policy in the United States, what is arguably the biggest change in terms of how Americans viewed government and its involvement in social policy um, is with the New Deal programs of Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency. As you may recall from U.S. history, oh, got you, Jordan. Roosevelt became president while the country was in the middle of the Great Depression, the biggest economic crisis in U.S. history. And Roosevelt's argument was that in order for the government to help the country get out of this economic crisis, we needed to dramatically increase government spending and involvement, creating new regulatory laws and agencies that would kind of keep an eye on banks and Wall Street to make sure they did not abuse the system and make the same mistakes that caused the Great Depression. That government needed to spend money creating new programs that would provide Americans with jobs or help them keep their homes by, basically buying up their home debt and then providing easier payment plan options for families. So thinking back to Unit 4, would we describe that as a more liberal or conservative approach to government? The idea of increasing government spending to more directly provide assistance to Americans, kind of creating new regulations on business and banking. Got one vote for conservative so far. Say, is anyone able to provide kind of just a brief reminder of kind of what was kind of the key difference between having a conservative political view versus a liberal political view?
Okay, I will. Conservative is more open to change and more open to more more money towards the government to fund things like healthcare and everything, while liberal is more security that hopes with an decrease in funding with the government spending and decrease in no increase in security and increase in things like sorry if I'm drawing a blank, but you probably get what I'm saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you have the explanations straight on. We just need to flip the terms. Generally speaking, conservatives tend to put a bigger emphasis on wanting to hold on to tradition, kind of like how we've done things in the past. Well, let's keep doing that. Generally speaking, conservatives want government to be smaller or less involved, especially in the economy, and then tend to put a bigger emphasis on security. So generally speaking, conservatives want government to spend more money on the military or policing or immigration control. On the flip side, then, liberals tend to be more open to social change and more accepting of government providing assistance to try to help even out the playing field. Not to say that, everyone's going to be economically equal in the United States. You're always going to have people that are richer or poorer than others, but, government providing more assistance to people who are maybe at the bottom, helping to pull people out of poverty. And then generally speaking, are more favorable towards government regulations towards business or banking, arguing that those institutions may abuse their power if regulations are not in place. So Franklin D. Roosevelt is often viewed as being one of the most liberal presidents in U.S. history. And generally speaking, the creation of new social policies or new social programs tends to line up more with the liberal approach to government. So this idea of increasing government spending and involvement to get the country out of the Great Depression is more of a liberal approach. That would include the creation of Social Security. Um, Social Security is a program that exists today that refers to really several government programs that provide social welfare, basically economic assistance to different kinds of Americans that otherwise may kind of struggle financially on their own. So that includes the elderly, people who have retired, are no longer or are unable to kind of work kind of a long-term job. Um, it also can refer to people that might have some sort of disability or handicap that prevents them from really being able to hold down a job. Social Security can also help with hospital insurance. But the original idea behind Social Security was during the Great Depression, where because a lot of banks went under and lost people's savings in the process, you had a lot of older Americans who could not retire because they're like, well, the bank lost all my money. If I were to leave my job, I would have nothing to live off of. So Social Security was created to help older Americans retire during the Great Depression to start opening up jobs for the next generation of young people that were kind of entering the workforce. The other period in US history where we see a big expansion of social policies in the United States is what's called the Great Society, which is a policy push by President Lyndon B. Johnson, arguably America's most liberal president in terms of the policies he pushed that include the creation of Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare is a government program that provides medical cost support for older Americans. Medicaid kind of does a similar thing for low-income Americans. It's also under the Great Society that we see a big push for more access to education in the United States. The passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which includes creating the program known as Head Start. It's also during this time period that we see some of the most significant laws addressing racial inequality in the United States, the passing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Kind of all part of what Johnson called a war on poverty. Johnson basically made the argument that, America's the wealthiest country on the planet. If there's one country that should be able to eliminate poverty among its people, it's the United States, and believing that an expansion of government programs, social policies, could do that. Now, what really became the problem for Johnson is that he also pushed to expand the war in Vietnam. And it's kind of hard to do both. If you're going to try, if you're going to massively increase government spending on social programs while you're also spending a lot of money on a war on the other side of the planet, that puts a lot of financial pressure on the government. And so that's kind of one of the challenges government constantly has to juggle is there's a lot of things government is trying to get done. There's not always enough money for everything. So what do you prioritize? But to wrap up for today, to really quickly answer this student question of what government branch is over healthcare or makes the final decision about healthcare. Technically all three, and at the same time, none of them, because ultimately, for the most part, healthcare in the United States is a private industry, meaning you have private businesses that operate and exist to make profit within our healthcare system. But government can set different laws and regulations. Those laws would be passed by the legislative branch, Congress, They then get enforced or carried out by the executive branch, the presidency, and at various times, those laws may be reviewed by the judicial branch, including the Supreme Court. So that's a very quick answer to a very complicated question. As always, if you have any questions, stick around. Let me know. I'm happy to discuss things further. Otherwise, you are good to go. Hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you back here on Thursday. Thanks, Noah. See ya, Ira.